the New Testament. Let me give you one that is very surprising to my students. It's surprising because some of them have read this before, but they've never really thought about it. It's the view that you find in the Gospel of Matthew. The first Gospel. In the first major teaching of Matthew, the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7. Jesus explicitly tells his followers, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass away until from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." The scribes and the Pharisees for Matthew, are the highly religious Jews, and you have to keep the law better than them. What? You have to keep the law better than the most religious Jews? Yes. For Matthew, the answer is yes. That's in the New Testament? Yes, that's in the New Testament. This is the view that you find in the Gospel of Matthew. Christ did not abolish the law. Christ fulfilled the law, and his followers have to follow the law. And then Jesus proceeds to explain what he means. You've heard it said that you should not murder. I say to you, you should not only not murder, you should not get angry with someone else. You murder somebody out of anger, don't even get angry in the first place. You've heard it said, don't commit adultery. Don't take someone else's spouse. What I say to you is, don't even think about it. Don't even want to take your neighbor's spouse. You've heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, that the punishment should fit the crime. I say to you, turn the other cheek. Jesus radicalizes the law and makes it more difficult. He doesn't get rid of the law. Jesus doesn't say, you've heard it said that you should not commit adultery, but I say to you, you should commit adultery. He doesn't get rid of the law. He makes the law harder in Matthew. Christ's followers have to do the law even more strictly than the scribes and Pharisees. Jesus himself is portrayed as the new Moses in Matthew's gospel. Jesus goes up on the mount and he delivers an interpretation of the law of Moses, because for Matthew's gospel, Jesus is the new Moses. He's not a new Moses who replaces the old Moses. The old Moses is still there, but Jesus gives his interpretation of the law, which now has to be followed. So you have to follow the law, and you have to follow Jesus' interpretation of the law. It's an interesting question whether the Gospel of Matthew thinks that the followers of Jesus have to be Jews. I don't think there's an easy answer to this question, because Matthew doesn't come out and say. When Matthew does talk about the laws that people have to follow, in every case it's things like adultery and murder and turning the other cheek and so on and so on. He doesn't talk about laws like the laws of circumcision or kosher food. So it's hard to know, does Jesus want his followers to keep everything in the law? Some scholars think the answer is yes, that Matthew wanted his followers to be Jews, and others think the answer is no, that maybe he's just interpreting maybe ethical laws instead of ritual laws. It's an open question. What's not an open question is that Matthew had a high evaluation of the law and thought that Jesus' followers had to follow the law rigorously. Jesus' own interpretation of the law, in a sense, becomes the new law. You have to follow not just the prescriptions of Moses, but Jesus' interpretation of the prescriptions of